Boo. What is up, guys? It's me, Mojin again, bringing to you another late night, steamy hot sesh of Bojin vlogging. I hope you're excited, because I am too. I hope you brought another set of clothing, because you're gonna need it. Okay, I'm gonna stop being weird now. So cool. Sorry, guys. In this entry, I have something special for you, as not an extension, but as a follow-up of. I said that I would do a two-part series starting from last week, right? So this week is going to be part 2 of that series, right? And so last week I spoke about the fight between good and evil, right? And I went really deep down the rabbit hole of kind of considering that kind of really kind of deeply rooted, I guess, archetype of good versus evil. Right, and I kind of went full circle and I gave my own definition of meaning, which is to strive, or rather, I think the words I used in the entry were to voluntarily pursue goodness even if it is futile, or something along those lines, right? Because when you learn ultimately that like good and evil is an eternal clash, aka that evil, which we have all been told is to be banished, and eventually it will be banished by good, right? When we learn that evil is always going to be here, then like it can make us nihilistic, but in the midst of all of that, we can still choose to be good, right? Which is amazing. Right, and so like I felt that was a really nice little kind of definition for meaning in your life, right? Something that's going to give you a lot of meaning in life is to do what you think is good, even if you know it's futile. Right, is ultimately what that means, right? So yeah, when you're touched by malevolence, as Jordan Peterson says, right, and you can still find something within yourself that wants to be good, that's a miracle, right? And it's also the seed of meaning in your life, right? When you've been hit by that and you can still like somehow find some way to do good in the world, that's great, right? And like I'm just a normie, right? I haven't been through any really debilitating things, nothing too tragic, but like, we shall see, we shall see. Anyway, so let's see. Okay, so whereas in that entry I was talking about good and evil, right? In this entry, it's in the title, but like it's a very similar entry. It's going to be a very similar entry about the stages of right and wrong, right? And on the surface, it would seem like that, like right and wrong kind of correspond to good and evil, right? And like that's actually not the case, right? In this entry, I want to talk about right and wrong from the perspective of like how to act properly, right? AKA like doing something that's right for you as opposed to doing something that's wrong for you, if that makes sense, right? So like it's not so much about morality, which was last week's entry. It's more about effectiveness. It's more about like, okay, like how do you do the right thing, right? As opposed to like how do you not be evil, right? It's kind of similar, I guess, but it's also different, if you see what I'm saying. But like, so this entry is going to be about that, right? So, but hopefully it's not going to be as long as last week's entry, but like, yeah, because it's a very similar, I went through a very similar thought process as I was kind of outlining this. So yeah, and if you haven't watched last week's entry, it was like a really deep entry, kind of dark, but deep, deeper than most of the other entries I've done recently, right? So I'll leave it in the end screen if you haven't watched it. But anyway, so in the same way that there is a kind of an order in which you kind of traverse the journey of awakening from the narrative of like the battle of good versus evil, and that good should triumph in the end, and that you should be on the side of good because good is the eternal peace which will come about at some point, right? All the way to like evil is ever present, and therefore to pursue good is futile, right? Basically, because you'll never make a dent in that dichotomy, right? And then you come back full circle, like, no, actually, I want to be good, right? No, so the narrative isn't completely wrong. That's the weird pretzel of it, right? Is, the weird irony is that, like, even though the narrative is overly simplistic, right, it still has value, even when you go all the way to the bottom and it's like, no, there's no value, right? It's value because you choose to have value, right? And like the fact that you went all the way down with me last week to those depths makes it even more meaningful, right? More valuable, right? So along those lines, I want to talk about right versus wrong, right? So, okay. So, this is another thing that human beings worry about, right? So good versus evil, aka like, pain, peace, love versus pain and suffering, right? That's something that is so fundamental to our lives, right? Another thing that's quite fundamental to our lives is like trying to do the right thing, or really trying to act in such a way that will provide us with the most good things, I guess, right? The most good outcomes, the most good consequences, right? That's what we want. And so like it's something that we think about a lot. It's like, how do I act effectively so that I get the things that I want, right? And there's a step, or rather there's like when you think about it deeply, like with good and evil, right? You realize that there's stages to this, right? So obviously, well, not obviously, but like the first stage of like being effective is not being effective, right? And this is infancy, right? So if you ask a kid, right, a young infant, right, if like how to be effective, the infant has no concept about this, right? The kid has no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, he or she does not care, right? Because a young child is like taking the world based on inspiration. He acts based on pure inspiration, right? There's no like consideration of anything. It's just like, I feel like doing this, I'm gonna do it, right? And so like, yeah. So the infant knows nothing of consequences, right? When the infant grows up, he or she realizes that his or her actions have consequences, right? And good consequences lead to, joy, satisfaction, fulfillment, praise from parents, right? And bad consequences come with pain and frustration and like fear and shame, right? And punishment from the parents, right? So like eventually the child learns that like, that there is there's consequences to their actions, right? And like, so when we grow up, we realize that we need to act in such a way that's going to maximize good opportunities and abundance, right? And leading to more situations that we like, versus moving away from things that we don't want, right? That will lead to pain and and shame and all that stuff, right? And just generally not having the life that we want, right? So this is the personal development thing. It's like, how do you build a life that you want, right? Well, I'm not going to talk about the practical how to, right? That's self-help, personal development, right? There are other people who talk about this, or rather there are videos where I talk about this specifically, but in this entry I wanted to just tackle like the concept of like trying to do the right thing, right? So that you can get what you want, so that you can not be a dick, right? So like, I guess this comes with the presupposition that you're trying to be a good person, right? So like, this is the meta framework of like, okay, I'm not really catering for people who want to be evil, right? But I guess you could still apply it if you wanted to be evil, right? You can still kind of apply the same framework, but like, But yeah, obviously I'm talking to people like myself who want to be good people, right, and want to do things right. So, um, so okay, so what's the first thing that happens when you realize that there's consequences, right? So like this is the child growing up. It's like you realize that you need to follow your parents' advice, right? You know that there is a good way of doing things, right? Um, but that you you know there is a good way of doing things, and like your parents seem to know what that is, so you follow their advice, or your teachers, so you learn to follow instructions, right? That's the most fundamental. Like, how do you be effective? You follow instructions, right? Because it works under the assumption that like the people who are giving you instructions have your best interest in mind, right? But of course, right? Of course, right? It's fine in school, I suppose, right? But then like when you get into employment, right? When you become an adult and you have to go into the real world, right? Following instructions does not always lead to good consequences, right? You know, you might even argue that like before that, like if you're in school, like following instructions isn't necessarily a good option, right? But like when you're in employment is when you first realize that like okay, you can't just follow instructions, right? So like you follow instructions at work, and like not only might they not be the right thing for the task at hand, right? Because in school you're just like learning a curriculum and you're passing tests on it, right? But like in in employment, like it's a business, right? And like people need to make money. The business needs to make money, and therefore like things need to be done right and effectively, right? So like if the person who's giving you instructions, your boss, is giving the wrong instructions, right? Then like the company suffers, you suffer because you're doing bad work essentially, right? Not only that, not only is there the potential for like um the your boss to give you bad instructions, but also they will give you instructions that aren't necessarily in your best interest, right? You know, because your parents love you, right? When they give you instructions like to follow, they're doing it because they love you and they want you to be happy and good and healthy, right? Your teachers, you know, not it's not as close, but at least they do want you to do well, right? They want you to pass your exams and to learn a lot, right? You know, but when you're in work, when you get to work, right? It's like your bosses do not care about you, right? They don't care about your well-being, right? They only care about you like to the extent that you can work for them productively, right? So like not only could their instructions be potentially bad, but they could also like potentially give you instructions that work against you, right? So like I mean, the moral of the story is don't ever get into employment. No, the point is that like at some point if you want to move ahead in your life, right? If you want to be more effective and also like move towards things that you want, right? Then you need to like go beyond just blindly following instructions and to start thinking for yourself, right? And when you start to think for yourself, right? So like, we've outlined some steps, right? So step one, you're an infant, you don't care, you don't know about consequences, nor do you care, you're just living through pure inspiration, you're just doing whatever the hell you want, right? Then stage one is you realize slowly that there are consequences to your actions, right? Even if it starts with your parents get angry at you if you do the wrong thing, or your parents love you if you do the right thing, right? You learn that there are consequences, right? So like you start to like follow instructions because like, hey, at the very least, like they endear you to the people that are giving you instructions, right? And and you learn to stay off their bad side, right? But as you go into adulthood, you learn that that's not a good strategy, right? Not like both in terms of like you like it may not be the right instruction, right? And secondly, because like it might not be in your best interest, right? Because like the instructions are not to help you or to make sure that you're happy. They're to like make you better at doing your job, right? Which can often run contrary to your happiness and like your actual development, right? You know. So like if you want to break beyond that, the third step, right? The third step is to start thinking for yourself, right? To start like discerning between what is good, what are good things to do and what are bad things to do, right? You know, and so like you start to rely on yourself to like find ways of doing things, right? That that are helpful to you, right? Um, so you do this, you still follow instructions, right? But like you become the chooser of instructions, right? Instead of like just blindly following instructions from your superiors, you start to like find your own superiors to take instructions from, right? So you're so like really you're dealing with rules, right? Like you're thinking like, okay, I want this to happen, right? So I'm going to follow this rule, right? You know, and a lot of the times, the way we've been taught, and I say a lot of times, like pretty much in all cases, like we've been taught to kind of follow instructions, follow processes that lead to a certain indicatable result, right? So like, if I mix this chemical with, maybe that's not a good example. Let me think of something. Yeah, it's like, um, yeah, it's like, okay, like, I have to. I'm kind of struggling to think of a good example here. I know what I'm trying to say, but like the example is kind of on the tip of my tongue. Basically, like we're taught to do things effectively, right? To do things effectively, right? AKA, like you have a task, it's been outlined. You need to optimize your ability to do that task, right? So this kind of applies to both school and work. It's like basically the the premise is given to you, right? It's like this is the thing, right? And your job is to do it and do it well, right? So like the kind of premise has been given to you, right? And like you need to do that thing effectively, right? So like, you get better at making notes, you get better at like not bookkeeping. I'm trying to think of like specific examples, like, but like, yeah, like, how to write well, right? How to use words and grammar properly. How to do exams properly, how to do your job properly, right? And it's like, that's great, right? And like, eventually you learn like, okay, like these people might not, these other instructions might not be as effective as this thing, right? So like, you kind of continue to optimize, right? And that's the third step. But you ultimately learn, right, that just doing things better is not enough, right? Just doing things better is not enough because you don't know if what you're doing is even relevant, right? So like, you realize that like you can't just tackle things from the point of view of like, I just need to improve this process. You need to start to think about, okay, what effect do I want to have, right? and how do I produce an effect. So you're not trying to improve a process, you're trying to have an effect, right? If that makes sense, right? So like your approach becomes less about like knowing processes and regulations, you know, to like to like actually like thinking in terms of like, okay, what do I need to do that will have this effect, right? You know, because like, the thing is like, okay, so like you learn that there's consequences, right? Like aka like if you want the things that you want, if you want a life that you want, you need to think about consequences, right? You need to do things that are going to lead to good things, right? But like you don't know how to do that necessarily, right? So you follow people's advice, right? And you follow people's advice, but like you realize that like they have limitations, right? The advice they give you, or like the opportunities they give you, right? So you start to find your own processes to follow, right? That are close to what you want, right? However, like those processes may still not produce the effect you want, right? If this makes sense. I'm kind of like describing this a bit mechanically, but like the step after that is like, you become someone who like thinks more about effect, right? And like actual I wrote it down here. Yeah, step 3 is do what is symbolically right. aka like you follow the instructions, and you follow like you find the best set of instructions and you follow them, right? And you try to follow them well, right? So I'm following a ketogenic diet, right? Which means that I need to make sure that I get no more than 50 grams of carbohydrates in my body, and I need to count my carbs, and I need to limit my protein, right? Or whatever it might be, right? So like you follow those instructions, right? And like so you get like so you look at things that purport to have a certain effect, and you're like, oh, I'd like that, so I'm going to follow this instruction, and you try to follow the instructions as good as you can. That's step 3, right? You're not just blindly following instructions like in number 2. Right? Number 2, you're just blindly following instructions, right? Because you want to avoid punishment, and you want to be in peace, right? More or less, right? But then ultimately you realize that like that's not fulfilling enough for you. It's not leading you to like where you want to be, right? So you start to be like, okay, actually I'm going to start to find my own ways of doing things, right? And the first kind of port of call for that is like finding processes that have been documented that you can follow, right? And you try to follow them, right? And that's doing things symbolically, right? But step 4 is doing things. Let me read the actual wording I put. Doing what is actually right, as opposed to doing what is symbolically right. Doing something that's symbolically right means like you have a framework given to you that purports to have a certain result, and you do it well, right? Because like the thing is, you don't know. When you're at that step, you're like, okay, I think I want to be healthy, right? And like I read somewhere that like the paleo diet or the keto diet is healthy, so I'm just gonna see what the people say, right? And then like follow the instructions, right? Because you don't know, right? But then like let's say you follow the ketogenic diet or you follow the paleo diet, right? And you realize that like it has some really good effects, and it helps you, like, and it's way better than standard American English diet, right? Of like, high carbs, high processed fats and fried foods and sugar and stuff like that, right? And it makes you feel better. However, like, it has some side effects, right? It has some like unintended side effects, right? And so at that point, you realize that you need to go a step further, right? It's not enough to just follow instructions and hope that things will go well, right? You actually have to start looking at what actually works, right? what actually works for me, for example, is like I try to eat low carb as much as possible, right? But like occasionally I'll indulge because like I just can't go on a ketogenic diet for that long. Like I can't go on like a low carb, like fats only diet for too long, right? Um, at least not right now. Maybe in the future I will, but it's like I stopped thinking, oh, I just need to follow this diet and everything's gonna be okay. Because that's what I thought when I first started doing the ketogenic diet, like a few months ago. Like I did it for a month, like, and I was like, I'm gonna be really healthy after this. But it's like I did improve in some ways, but like in other ways, like I kind of lost things, right? Um, yeah, like, and I detailed these in the Lego Mobo. I think it was two Lego Mobos before this. It was like the Man I'm Almost 30 one. I talk about the ketogenic diet in case you're interested in my opinions on it. Um, but like you start to realize, okay, no, it's about effectiveness, right? You know, you want a like the first step is like there's consequences, so you want good consequences and not bad consequences, aka like you don't want to be punished and you want to be left alone, basically, right? That's step one. Step two is that like you realize um that like you're not getting the results that you want, right? And you're not as fulfilled as you want to be, so like you start looking for other like processes and like mentalities and things of that nature, right? New ways of thinking, new ways of doing, right? That seem to promise that your life will improve in that direction, right? And you do it, right? And you try to follow them religiously, but you realize that like they're just guidelines, really, right? They're just guidelines, and like if you want real like positive results, then you need to think about effectiveness, right? So instead of doing what is like symbolically right, you need to do what's actually right. I hope you're following me with this. Like this entry is a bit more kind of cerebral than the last entry, but okay. So yeah. So okay. So this is all good, right? And like it's your journey of like kind of like learning to be effective as a person, right? And like how to change your life for the better. However, like like you have times when like you feel burnt out, right? Or like things fail, right? You try your best, but like you just rebound, or like you binge, or like whatever it is, right? Like you relapse, right? You go back to old ways of doing things, right? And you kill yourself over it because you're like, fuck, like I worked so hard. Why did I fail, right? Why did I fail? And the reason for that is because sometimes you need to let mistakes be, right? So this whole journey, like I don't know if I mentioned this already, but like yeah, like mistakes are basically bad consequences, or things that lead to bad consequences, right? Because no one willingly does things that leads them to bad consequences, right? Unless it's for like an ulterior reason, right? But like generally speaking, people don't want things to do things that lead them to a worse place than they are, right? And so like when things happen that lead you to a bad consequence, it's a mistake, right? And so like this journey is you realizing that like I need to not make mistakes. I need to not fuck myself over. So I need to keep improving on like what I know and how I do things, right? And so you go through all of these paradigms, right? You shift through all of these paradigm levels, and then you get to a point where like you're relapsing and you're rebounding and you're failing still, right? You're still failing and you're like, shit, right? Like, why, right? I'm trying so hard, I hate that I can't stick to my word. I'm a piece of shit, right? And to get over this, you need to realize that like that you need to let yourself, you need to let go sometimes, right? Sometimes not striving is the right thing, right? AKA, like, sometimes you need to just surrender, right? You know, you need to just surrender. You know, you need to just not try to control the situation if the situation's gone south. Just try to, like, appreciate the situation, appreciate the mistake, find what's good about it. You know, if you ate a donut, hey, it tastes good, right? The donut tastes good, right? And because it tastes good, it makes you happy, right? Sure, you're gonna get a sugar dip, in an hour or maybe sooner. But, like, hey, at least it tastes good, right? And and I don't necessarily need to beat myself up about it because, hey, it's not gonna kill me, right? And it's gonna make me happy. And it's like a break from, like, the rigid fucking regimen that I'm following. It's a break, right? And sometimes you need a break, right? So, like, basically this is like, okay, like, sometimes obviously you need to get to a place where you're doing things that benefit you, right? That are going to benefit you. But you then need to account for, like, times when, like, you're going to break out of that cycle of those things, right? You need, like, a break occasionally, right? And like, sometimes shit just happens and, like, you end up in a place that you don't know, right? Or, like, you end up doing something that you don't normally do, and it's like you're already doing it, right? So, and you can decide if you want to move or you want to keep doing that thing, but it's like, hey, you can appreciate it, right? So, like, sometimes you need to let go and not be so trying to control everything, right? Success is what you do, and also what you don't do, right? It's like, and, like, along these paradigm shifts, like, you're basically calibrating more and more to, like, what's helpful to you, right? You're not just like being lazy, right? You're not just being lazy, right? When you eat that donut, you're not just being undisciplined and fat, right? You're recognizing that, okay, right? I still want to be healthy, right? I still want to be effective, but the thing is that, like, trying to be effective and trying to be healthy, at a certain point, there's a certain critical point where, like, it actually makes you less effective. It actually makes you less less healthy, right? I guess it's called a point of diminishing returns, but, like, that's a weird part of life that, like, you need to obviously try, right, to do things well, but there comes a point where you're trying too hard and it actually makes you less effective, right? And, like, that's the reason you give yourself a break sometimes, because you need to recharge, because working too hard will start to have the opposite effect of what you want, right? So it's not just as simple as, I just need to follow this instruction as hard as possible, right? It's like, there's a point past which the returns diminish, right? And you stop getting what you want, and you start getting the opposite, right? So you realize that, like, sometimes you need to let go and not do anything, right? Let yourself make mistakes, aka, is just what I'm saying, right? But yeah. So, and it's recognizing that, like, it's like, causality is not simple. This is the important kind of part, like, concept of this step, right? This kind of realization is that, like, that causality is not simple, right? It's not, you do not A plus B is C, right? A plus B is C, but if there's too many A's and there's too many B's, then C becomes something else, right? And usually it's the opposite, right? Whatever the opposite of C is, right? An example of this is like, you can be nice to someone, right? But there's a point after which being more nice to them is actually like harming your relationship, right? It has the opposite effect of what you want, right? Yeah, like learning, right, at some point becomes excessive, right? Because you start to learn things that you're never going to apply, right? I know this is a weird thing to say, obviously learning is a good thing, right? It is a good thing, but you run the risk, if you're too obsessive with it, to like fill your head with shit that you're never going to be able to apply. It could all be like really useful information, right? Maybe you're like the king of like Trivial Pursuit, right? But like past a certain point, like you have so much knowledge in your head that like you couldn't hope to actually apply most of it, right? So why are you still learning, right? You might as well take the things that are most applicable and apply them, right? And then move, and then like, so like it's a cycle of applying and learning, right? You don't learn forever and you don't apply forever. You have to do both, right? And you have to kind of feel it out. So it's like an art form, right? In the same way that learning to push and strive and try and attempt, right? And to control, like, is one half of like including the other half of like, sometimes you need to just let go and relax and let life take you somewhere, right? Because like, if you're trying to it's like a stream or a river, right? If you, not a live stream, like an actual stream. Oh God. Shows my age, I guess. But like, I think if I said stream nowadays, like any millennials, like kind of like younger than me are going to be like, oh, why is he talking about live streaming, like Twitch or something, right? Or YouTube? No, I'm talking about like an actual stream, like a stream of water. Oh God, what a world we live in, right? But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's like sometimes like you're gonna go down. Like sometimes you need to swim in a direction because you want to go a certain way. But like when you're going in a good direction, even if you like, get caught in the wrong thing, in the wrong current, right? You're not going to be able to like paddle your way up, and even if you do, it's going to be like really hard, right? And like the thing about life is it's many streams, right? It's not that like you go down the wrong stream and you're fucked, right? It's like, no, obviously like you have to prevent yourself from kind of being influenced the wrong way, but like if it's something that like is not, it's like a donut, right? It's like, yeah, but you like donuts and, they taste good. I even want to eat one now talking about it, but like, it tastes good and like, yeah. And, and having one is not going to kill you, right? In the same way, like if you're a smoker and you quit smoking, but like, occasionally you feel like the urge to smoke, just like, you can smoke a couple like once a month or something, right? And it's like, yeah, it's not good for you in the same way that sugar's not good for you, but like, hey, like, if it means like you're not going to rob yourself of like, because like maybe that was that last little bit of willpower, right? And like you're like, no, I'm gonna not eat that donut, I'm not gonna have a cigarette, right? And like the next day you rebound because you were too hard on yourself, right? That's what step 4 is all about, right? It's like, you need to know that there's a limit in your pursuit for effectiveness, right? Where like past it, you're like actually damaging your effectiveness. You think that you need to do more of that thing, but like, you're human, right? And so like, yeah, you learn that like, not only that, but like, sometimes you need to like, sometimes things aren't simple. Right, you're nice to one person, and they're nasty to you, right? And you're nasty to another person, and they're nice to you, right? It's like sometimes you don't know, right? So you realize that like effectiveness is all about understanding like how like that like you can't just take things at face value. Sometimes you need to experiment and like and think about like how things are nuanced, right? You know, like you need to be flexible in some way, right? You can't just be too rigid in your approaches, right? You need to be somewhat flexible and open-minded, even if it means you're going to make mistakes, right? So, because like mistakes are necessary for you to grow, right? And this is really the last point. Is you get to a point where like, okay, so this actually goes into like something that Teal talked about recently. She had like a synchronization webinar. I think it was an actual seminar, but she was talking to someone about trust, and I actually commented on that video like an idiot. But like I couldn't help myself. I was so excited because it was like basically what I'm talking about in this entry, right? It's like okay, like, so basically there's a um, yeah, like basically it's like you. She talks about trust in a form of self trust. Like, can you trust yourself fully? Right? Can you trust yourself fully? Um, no, right? And then she goes into reasons why, but like I'll get into that in a second. But like, trust is like trying to be effective, right? You know, trying to get what you want, and also not like trying to not do the bad thing, right? I said mistakes like punishment and things like that, but it's also like how to not be a dick to people, like how to not cause more harm than is necessary, right? You know, um, you know, like how to be a good person. You know, some things that like us light workers kind of are more focused about, right? You know, how like okay, so like how do I get what I want, but also not be an asshole, and how do I like do the right thing, um, you know, and yeah, and the way that you sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, but yeah, but like so you get to a point where you realize that like there's a like, well, you need to be effective, but also you know that like past a certain point it has the opposite effect, right? So really we're getting into like kind of consciousness and unconsciousness, right? Which is like what Teal was referring to in a video about trust and self-trust, right? You know, because it's like consciousness is all about kind of being mindful, right? Being mindful, right? Because like one of the only armaments we have against the chaos of life is consciousness, right? We can try to understand, and in understanding we can try to kind of direct our lives in a way that's good, right? And not like, and doesn't produce like excessive suffering, doesn't like leave us dead without up a creek without a paddle, right? um you know however, step four, right, like realizing that like you have limits, that's also another way of saying like, or that relates to this in the form of like, you there's a limit to what you can be conscious about, right? And this is the last stage, where it's like you realize that mistakes are inevitable, because obviously you want to be a better person because like you want to do good and you don't want to make mistakes, right? But you learn that like ultimately mistakes are inevitable, right? Because you have limitations, right? Well, it's like, okay, so like you know that like sometimes you need to you know that there are nuances in things, right? You know that like sometimes you need to try, sometimes you need to let go, right? You know that sometimes you need to be a certain way to people, and then a different way to like, if it's becoming too excessive, right? Like if you're too nice, like you need to be nice to someone because like it shows that that you're on their side and like you care about them. But like if you're too nice to them, they might start taking advantage of you. And there are other examples of this, right? It's like Um, do I, yeah, diet, right? Do I eat healthy or do I eat for my happiness, right? Do I optimize for productivity or do I optimize for happiness, which is an entry I talked about, right? I did. And it's like, you can account for all of these, and you should, right? Because that's an expansion of consciousness. Like, so stage 4 is like becoming conscious that you're unconscious, if that makes sense, right? If that makes sense. Like knowing that you don't know, if is another way of saying it, right? Because Teal talks about not knowing what you don't know, right? What you don't, what you don't know, right? That's your like full blown unconscious, right? But you can kind of keep kind of scanning for like places where like there might be exceptions, right? So your kind of understanding of effectiveness is becoming more sophisticated, right? Because you know that there are exceptions to certain rules, right? And there are certain ways that you need to act in a way that's kind of a bit tipsy-turvy, right, to what would normally be the advice, right? You know, because there's like mainstream advice, right, and it tends to be very simplistic, you know. But like, like to succeed, you need to work hard. But do you need to always work hard? Maybe sometimes you need to work smart, right, and that means working less hard, right? Being smart so you don't have to work as hard, right? Because you can't work, you can't work yourself to death, right? So like success is hard work is one thing, right? You need to be smart, yes, but like maybe you might squander some of that intelligence in like pursuing things that don't lead you to success, right? So being smart is good, right? But like it's not everything, right? You know, um, you need to be nice to people so they like you, cool, right? But maybe they won't respect you, right? So like maybe you need to have a bit more backbone. But if you have too much backbone, like if you're too assertive and like disagreeable, then like people don't like you, right? So it's like there's all of these dichotomies and like kind of like tug of wars when it comes to like how to actually be effective, right? That's why simplistic advice never works, right? You need to kind of realize that there's a nuance, right? And you need to kind of like apply that to your life, right, to be effective. But and so like you know that there's a nuance, right? But the thing is, right, that like okay, but how do I know when to do this versus that? Right? How do I know that? How do I know when to be nice versus when to be a bit more assertive, right? Like on a case to case basis. How do I know like how to be a good person? This is a good one, right? How to be a good, compassionate person, but also look out for myself and succeed for myself and to pursue my own selfish dreams and ambitions, right? How do I balance that, right? So that I don't like betray my relationships, and so that I don't betray my dream, right? I don't want to betray either. How do I do that? That's a good example, because that's one I think about a lot. Like how do I not sacrifice the people in my life, right? How do I not throw them to like under the bus? But how do I also not do that to my dream, right? That's a constant one, right? And it's like, how do I balance that, right? And it's like, you might do it, might not, right? Because hey, mistakes are inevitable, right? Because you never know, right? You have things that you're blind to, right? Because you can't focus on multiple things at the same time. Like you can only like try a certain thing, right? A certain response, right? And see if it works or not, right? And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, right? Because just knowing that there's nuance, just knowing that okay, I just need to know to not, I can't be too like conservative, so I need to be a bit liberal. But I can't be too liberal, so I need to be a bit conservative, right? Just knowing that there's a nuance, right, doesn't mean that you can handle the nuance, right? Because you never know what the actual thing you need to do is, right? Until you try it, right? Because what if you're thinking, okay, I need to be nice to this person, right? Right? I need to be nice to this person, right? But I know that like maybe I need to actually not be nice to this person, right? Because then they'll respect me, right? Um, and so like you're nasty to them, right? But what you needed to be was nice, right? In that case, as an example, right? You just like kind of double thingied yourself, right? You kind of double bluffed yourself, or whatever it's called, right? Double think. I don't know what it's called, right? You see what I'm saying? Like you're like okay, I know the nuance, right? I know the nuance, right? I know that like I should be nice to this person, but maybe I need to be like more assertive, right? And so like because I know that like generally speaking people want me to be nice, but like if I but like but then like maybe I need to be more assertive, right? But maybe like being nice was what you wanted, and you just subverted yourself, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's the right word, but like you see what I'm saying, right? Like just knowing that like okay, like there's a balance, right? Doesn't mean that you'll like actually hit it, right? And even then, like if you like correct yourself, like it's not going to stay the same forever, right? You're always going to be on your toes, right? You're always going to be needing to think about, okay, like which one do I need to do, right? I'm not really illustrating this that well, but like I hope you're seeing what I'm saying. It's like there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, right? But sometimes the right way is wrong, and the wrong way is right, if that makes sense, right? Even though like the general advice is this is right, this is wrong. It's like this is right, but sometimes you need to do the other thing, right? And this is generally wrong, but sometimes you need to do it, right? And like that okay, so like both of these things are potentially useful, right? Even though one is supposedly right, one's supposedly wrong, right? But you know, how can you know which is right and which is wrong, right? And how can you know in a consistent way? You can't, right? You can't. You can't know for certain, right? You can guess, and the best guess you can have is to have a nuanced like kind of mentality about it, right? But like you don't know still, right? So yeah, and it's just like no wonder we make mistakes, right? It's like yeah, part of us is like we go on this journey to like improve ourselves. Like I don't want to make mistakes. I want to keep improving, and I want to keep doing the right thing. But like, can you ultimately do the right thing forever? No, you can't, because you have blind spots, and like there are nuances to things, and like you can try to anticipate the nuance by being like, I see what you're doing. You want me to select the wrong thing this time, right? Because yeah, because it's a nuance, right? All of these suckers think it's that thing because that's the general consensus. I'm going to pick the other thing, right? But it turns out that the general consensus is right, right? In that one example I gave, right? You know, and that could happen to you whenever, right? So that's why I say, right, that we make mistakes, and it's like, and you come full circle because it's like, okay, yeah, human beings are pretty flawed, huh? Right? Like I'm pretty flawed. Like no matter what I try, and I've been down this rabbit hole of like, I try, and I realize that like sometimes you have to not try, right? Or that you have to like look at nuances and like, but like even knowing the nuances and knowing like that like, yeah, like that sometimes you don't have to try, which is part of that nuance, right? Like it could still swing either way, and it doesn't stay the same because like the same person that you talk to could respond a certain way to like you being nice, or could respond, or no, you know what I'm saying? Like you want this customer to buy, and sometimes you're nice to them and it works, but then this one time you're nice and then they just like steamrolled you, and you realize that like they got cocky and you need to thingy, but like that doesn't mean that you stay cocky forever. You see what I mean, right? It's like you'll never know, but like the thing is, as flawed as we are, right? As unequipped as we are to like go about life in a perfect way, right? You know, again, it's similar to the previous entry. It's like, okay, but like, should you then not give a shit? Should you just be like, well, in which case, like, if I'm never going to be perfect, what's the point of even trying, right? I might as well just like, and then there are people who are like on either side, like, oh no, you need to keep trying, you know, and then, am I saying this right? And then there are people who are like, yeah, whatever, man, just leave it to fate, and it's like, it's still somewhere in the middle, right? But ultimately, it's like, you try your best to be conscious about it, right? You know, but you will make mistakes, no matter how conscious you are. Even if you're like you think you're smart and you're like, oh yeah, I know this. Like, I know that this is this nuance and like the right thing's actually wrong and the wrong thing's actually right. You know, or that like yeah like you know I normally people would give the advice to help people in need, but like what, I'm gonna not help them because I think that helping them might take away their opportunity to grow for themselves, and if anything, it'd be what's the word, overprotecting them, mollycoddling. I believe that's the word. Um, you know, and it's gonna like rob them of their opportunity to become better people, and it's like, yeah, but sometimes you just need to help them because they might just fail altogether, right? But then sometimes you actually need to show them a bit of tough love and be like, you know what, I'm gonna leave you to your own devices and then see what you come up with, even though you're struggling and you're asking for help. Well, I know that like me helping you is gonna rob you of an opportunity to grow. It's like, what do you do, right? You know, do you tell your yeah do you help that person, right, or do you not help that person, right? Because both have potential value, haha, right? And it's like, you don't know. You just have to try, right? But like you take your best stab and you're like, okay, I think this is the right answer, right? I know the nuances, and I'm still betting on the one I think is going to be right. I'm not like doing all this tricky shit like, huh, you know what? Even though I say like humorously like, oh, I'm going to go for the one I think like because I think this is right. This right thing is wrong and this wrong thing is right. It's like, no, you're not playing fucking like roulette or some shit, you're still trying to do the right thing, but you're mindful of the nuance. You know that like it could be wrong or it could be right, and the other thing could be wrong or right. Right. So yeah. So yeah, that's a bit more anticlimactic than the last entry, but like it's like ultimately like what this realization means is like that, yeah, humans are flawed and you will always make mistakes. Doesn't matter how perfect you get. It doesn't matter how much you improve. You'll always make mistakes, right? Because there'll always be things you didn't account for. Always be things that like you just make the wrong guess at, right? So like maybe it's better to be a kid and not give a shit and just live completely by inspiration, because even if you try your fucking best, right, you rack your brain because like when you start to get into this nuanced shit, it's mentally intensive, man. Because you're like, oh, particularly if you're sensitive like me, it's like, oh, do I do this thing? But then if I do this, will it rob them of their opportunity to learn? But then I should probably help them. Plus, like, if I don't help them, they might resent me. But like, but which one's better? Like, to be in a good position with them, or to actually help them in a real world way, which might be a bit harsher. Oh boy, I kind of need to do both. Oh no, and it's like, it's oh god, right? You know, if you want to be effective and you really want to be effective, you're going to be thinking yourself into knots, right? Because you need to consider all of the variables, all of the nuances, right? All of your blind spots, all of like potentially where like you're trying too hard and you need to fall back, or if you're not trying hard enough. And it's just like so much consideration, so much analysis paralysis, man. And it's like, no, or rather like, okay, and you're doing all of this and it's like you're still going to make mistakes, right? Evil's always going to be here, so what's the point of being good, right? You're always going to make mistakes, right? Because you can't know everything at once, and you can't always guess right. So like what's the point of even trying to be effective, right? Why not just enjoy yourself, right? Or just follow instructions the rest of your life, right? You know? It's like, or try to like be like, just like keep being effective, right? You know, both camps. But, um, sorry, lighting went a bit weird there. But you can still be effective. It's the same thing as last entry, basically. You can still be effective, right? Because, well, you might as well be, because at least then, like, you can understand more, and it's like, well, again, it's like, yeah, you know, I could save some brain cells, and like nothing would even happen, and it's like, yeah, you could do that, you know, but like, it's, you know, why not try to be a good person and try to be effective, right? You see the overlap here, it's starting to overlap now. It's like, yeah, same thing. It's like, you don't have to be a good person, you don't have to be effective, right? You know, it's basically, yeah, you don't have to try, right? But like, if you try, then, you know, well, if you try, there's definitely benefits to it, right? Because like you'll, well, there's benefits and there's very obvious dangers as well, right? Because if you try, like, you could fail catastrophically, but like, but if you try, generally speaking, like, you do improve, right? I mean, it's all give and take at the end of the day, but like, yeah, why not try? In the same way, why not be a good person, right? Because you can, and it's going to provide your life with meaning, right? So, yeah, bit of an anticlimactic entry, I guess, but like, I don't know, maybe I need to be less harsh on myself. But it's really late right now, and I think I need to sleep. But yeah, but I hope that was insightful, at the very least. It's just, yeah. Again, these two entries haven't been really practical. They're just me kind of like mentally masturbating. I love doing that, yeah. But you know, but I guess it does apply, right? Because if you're like me, you do find yourself in situations where you think about these things, and like it's okay, like how do I be a good person? How do I do the right thing? And it's like that's a worthwhile question to ask, but you realize that like it leads you to a place where you realize it's futile ultimately, right? When you think in the grand scheme of things, because like it's a journey, you're going on this journey, and the journey is to become a better person. And but when you zoom out all the way, you realize that you're just this insignificant little amoeba, right, in this endless ocean, right? And it's like, well, even the little piece of rock that you're living in is not going to be forever, right? You know, the solar system is not going to be forever, right? So it's like, what's the fucking point ultimately? But that's where the point comes in, right? You know, that's the beauty of things. It's like, that's where the, you know, that's when that's where like, yeah, you know, you find meaning. Is you kind of like cross that chasm of like meaninglessness and futility, and you get to the meaning, right? So like, be a good person, because why not, right? Spread that light, but also try to be effective and try to do the right thing, right? Try to think about nuances, right? Try to like follow advice, try different things, right? And when you make mistakes, don't be too hard on yourself, right? Sometimes those mistakes will be costly. Sometimes they will be. Sometimes they'll be really costly, right? And like it's not pleasant to think about, but hey, like, even though those things will happen regardless of whether you try or not, you might as well try, right? And think about things, because like then you can talk about those things, you can inspire other people with those things, you know, and you'll just have a way more interesting story. I think, you know, people will listen to you, right? You know, like you could end up on the same porch that some other, like, you know, lazy bones, like, who did like fuck all in their lives and just drank the, like, you know, like, well, okay, assuming that they don't have like some drinking problem or anything, like, you know, someone who just, like, you know, who gives a shit, right? You know, just like, whatever, man, just enjoy life. You could be sat on the same porch as them, right? But like, but people will be listening to you because you're like, well, you know, I learned this thing, right? You know, so I don't know. It's up to you, but like, I'm sure that if you're like me, then you know what your choice is. But anyway, so yeah, Hopefully that was insightful, and at least interesting. But yeah, if you have any comments, as usual, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll read them and reply to them. And yeah, thank you very much for watching this as usual. I know one. Okay, I've actually crossed 200 vlog entries. I've done 200 vlog entries. That's fucking crazy. But like, I haven't actually done anything about it. I don't know if I should. I kind of really don't have the time, if I'm honest. But at the very least, I'll acknowledge it in this entry. So like, I've made 200 entries. Well, if you count like my Bojinjin Preachers mini series I did, like that's like more even, right? I've already I've been past 200 for a little while, but like, yeah, that's crazy. I've talked, I rambled about weird shit for like over 200 entries, and that's crazy. But like, if you've even watched any, selection of videos I've done, then thank you. Right? It's like I really have been on a crazy journey, right? At least with this vlog entry, anyway. But yeah, when I watch my old really old entries, I'm like, God, I was so cute and naive, right? And now things are a bit different. But any case, yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I didn't really do anything special for it. I was hoping to, but like, honestly, nowadays I'm just really busy. Um, you know, and so like I can't just like willy-nilly do things for no reason as much as I used to be able to. But any case, I just thought I'd acknowledge that and like pat on the back to me, I guess. I talked shit about rather I talked about weird shit for like 200 entries. Yeah. It's crazy though. Like from 2014 till now, I've been doing this shit for 4 years. That's crazy. I never thought I'd be able to do anything for that long. But it's fun and it's a way for me to communicate my thoughts for anyone who might be interested. So that's pretty good, you know. I sometimes think about why I'm doing these entries, particularly now, but I always come up with the answer of, well, they're just, why not, right? In the same way that, like, why be a good person? Why try to be good when you're going to make mistakes in the end of the day? Like, well, why not, right? Just it's interesting. It at least staves off boredom, right? It's at least something that's interesting, right? And yeah, I really love doing these entries. It's like, again, I don't see how they help. A lot of them are just gibberish, honestly, but like, hey, it's like I like doing them, and like if you like watching them, I'm grateful. If you don't, then that's also cool, right? It's like sometimes I get negative comments, and it can be a bit like disheartening, and I can get triggered sometimes, but like, but I like them, they're still people's thoughts on what I do, and yeah, and sometimes you can learn quite a lot in a negative comment that you wouldn't normally learn in someone just being nice to you, right? And I'm not saying don't be nice to me, but like, it's just what it is, right? But like, anyway, yeah, I'll keep doing these entries for as long as I can, and just sharing my thoughts. But I hope you enjoyed this entry, and yeah, I hope you'll continue to go on your journey, as I am. It's hard sometimes, but just keep going. Do what makes you happy. Right? And I know that there's nuances in that, right? That's not everything there is to life, but like, do what makes you happy, and also do what's meaningful, do what's important, right? Find people who are important to you. Love the people who are important to you, because I guess they won't be here forever, right? And do the work to be a competent person, right? And sometimes do things that are a bit alien to you, but are nevertheless important and could help you grow in a way you wouldn't ordinarily, you wouldn't otherwise grow in, right? And now I'm starting to preach to you, but like you know what I'm saying, like it's like do what makes you happy. Do what is potentially difficult but also meaningful. And yeah, that's it really. But thank you very much for watching this, guys, and I'll see you in the next entry. Until then, yeah, keep going, my friends. My friend, keep going. And I'm sure that even if nothing else, it'll be worthwhile. I don't regret anything I've ever done. Right? I don't regret anything I've ever been through because it's my life. You know. That doesn't mean don't have any future ambitions, because I hella do, right? And like I won't stop at anything in my way, like against that, but like right, within reason, right? I'm pretty set on doing what I'm doing, but at the same time, I'm happy to have gone through everything I've gone through, right? Good and bad. But anyway, so cool. No more dilly dallying. Thank you guys for watching this, and I will catch you in the next Bojunion vlog. Until then, peace out.